literally no offense to anything. They're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
This would have been a lot better if they, had a strong male along with her, a prince, if it wasn't about socialism, if they didn't remove the dwarves, if they had real dwarves.
Rachel Zegler had it all lined up. After a breakout performance in West Side Story, she landed the coveted lead in Disney's Snow White remake, a role that had the potential to define her career. It was a historic casting. She would be the first Latina actress to portray the iconic princess in a major Disney film. The announcement made headlines. Fans were divided, but Disney stood by its decision, promoting the film as a modern, inclusive take on the 1937 classic.
Argument should have been from Peter Dinklage. There's power of being on TV, there's power of television, and to put 7 people with dwarfism on camera in a major Disney movie, there's still power there.
Behind the scenes, Zegler prepared intensely. She studied the character, rehearsed every line, and stepped into the role with the weight of Disney's legacy on her shoulders. But as cameras started rolling, another voice entered the conversation, one powerful enough to change the entire course of the production. Peter Dinklage didn't hold back. In a fiery interview that spread across news outlets and social media, he called out Disney's so-called progressiveness. He accused the studio of hypocrisy, asking how they could celebrate casting a Latina lead while still telling a story about 7 dwarves living in a cave.
They're remaking the movie, they just got rid of the dwarves, okay?
Okay, but what do they call them?
Why would they get rid of the dwarves, though?
Magical creatures.
But they have one token dwarf amongst these magical creatures.
He called the narrative outdated and offensive. The timing couldn't have been worse. Production was already underway, and Dinklage's words hit like a wrecking ball. Disney executives panicked. The backlash wasn't just loud, it was political, emotional, and viral. Suddenly, the story wasn't about celebrating a diverse new Snow White. It was about whether the entire film should have been made at all. Zegler watched the storm unfold in real time. Her casting, which once symbolized progress, was now tangled in a web of controversy she didn't start. And worse, it was starting to feel like she was being used.
Disney has cast Rachel Zegler to play Snow White, which caused a lot of controversy because Zegler is Hispanic and the character is traditionally German.
Like her presence in the film had become a shield for a project that was falling apart. Directors were pulled into last-minute meetings, scripts were rushed back into rewrites. The 7 dwarves were quietly scrapped, replaced by vague magical creatures, and the entire storyline shifted. Major plot points were softened or removed. Dialogue was reworked to dodge offense. Zegler had trained for one version of Snow White, but she was now filming something entirely different. A fractured fairy tale cobbled together in real time.
You actually just went backwards. You actually just erased the dwarfism side of it. The disability, like we're a disability group. You just erased that whole image.
As the script changed, so did the tone of the set. Tension grew. Actors questioned their roles. Scenes were shot, scrapped, and reshot. Crew members whispered about the Dinklage effect like it was a curse hanging over the project. Meanwhile, Zegler kept showing up. She smiled through interviews, posted updates, and said nothing. She had to. Her contract kept her from addressing the chaos, but behind closed doors, she was growing frustrated. The dream Disney sold her had been rewritten, and she knew exactly when it started to fall apart.
Peter Dinklage was criticized by some actors with similar conditions, like Dylan Postl said Peter Dinklage was being selfish and that community needs more work.
The cracks didn't stop at rewrites. They split the entire production in half. What was once a clear vision had turned into a confused battle between old and new. Directors and producers argued over tone. Should Snow White stay true to the original fairy tale? Or should it be reworked to fit modern values? The answer changed weekly. What didn't change was Rachel Zegler's position in the middle. As the star, her face was on every poster, her voice in every trailer, but behind the scenes, she had no control.
Rachel Zegler is supposed to play Snow White. She's Latina. It says, literally no offense to anyone, but I was a little taken aback that they were very proud to cast a Latina actress as Snow White, but you're still telling the story of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs.
She was trapped in a story being rewritten around her, and she was the one taking the hits. Test screenings confirmed the worst fears. Early audience reactions were lukewarm, even hostile. Viewers called the story tonally off, confused, and awkwardly political. One internal studio report stated that the film felt like 2 separate movies edited into one. That wasn't far from the truth. Scenes that clashed with Dinklage's criticisms were either edited down or replaced. The dwarves were gone, the prince was sidelined, and much of the emotional arc had been flattened.
Because right now there's more dwarves on this podcast than there are in the new Snow White movie. And that's probably due to Peter Dinklage.
Yep.
What was left didn't feel like Snow White at all. It felt like a damage-controlled Frankenstein project, stitched together by panic. Zegler knew it. Every time she stepped on set, she could feel the shift. The energy had changed. Directors no longer spoke with confidence. Producers hovered more often. Scripts arrived late. Some days, she'd film a scene she had rehearsed for weeks. The next day, she'd be told to do a completely different version. Continuity didn't matter anymore.
And I get it, there's a difference between spoiling and whatever, but to go out and badmouth everybody and talk smack about, older movies in the same franchise, the canon story, I guess?
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. I feel like they would have had better control over that.
Public perception did. Disney wasn't just making a movie. They were trying to fix a mistake they believed Dinklage exposed. But in doing so, they created new ones. And Zegler was exhausted. She had signed on to tell a story about kindness, courage, and magic. Instead, she found herself stuck in a corporate minefield of politics, reputational cleanup, and internal chaos. By the time filming wrapped, she wasn't promoting a dream role anymore.
That controversy is being compared to Halle Bailey's Little Mermaid, which did lose $50 million, making only $555 million in a budget of $250 million.
She was doing damage control. Her interviews became tense, her smiles thinner, every word was scrutinized, every answer clipped and dissected. And all the while, the question lingered. Who ruined Snow White? Peter Dinklage's name kept surfacing. Disney never officially blamed him, but their choices said enough. His interview had forced their hand, cost them millions in rewrites, and gutted the heart of the film.
And someone goes like, hey, Seven Dwarfs is offensive to midgets. You're like, oh, okay, so let's just not employ any of them.
Yes, Peter Dinklage.
And Zegler, though publicly silent, was furious. She saw Dinklage's comments as a spark that lit the fuse. He had spoken from a place of power, but it was her career, her performance, and her image that had to survive the fallout. The cast and crew moved on, but the resentment remained. No one could say it out loud, but in back rooms and private calls, the story was clear. The film collapsed under the weight of a message it was never built to carry. And at the center of it all, Zegler, who never asked to be a symbol, only to be Snow White. By the time post-production began, the damage was already baked in. Editors worked overtime trying to stitch together something salvageable, but every cut revealed how deeply the film had fractured. Scenes didn't flow, characters lacked purpose. Storylines that once had weight now felt hollow, empty, like placeholders for the controversy Disney was too afraid to confront. Every attempt to polish the film only exposed more of what had gone wrong. Rachel Zegler had become the unwilling face of a project that no longer knew what it was trying to be. Legal documents filed during the editing phase show a sharp uptick in internal studio disputes. Executive memos reveal heated arguments over final cuts, marketing strategy, and whether to lean into the controversy or pretend it never happened. Test audiences flagged issues with tone and character development, especially the removal of the dwarves. Many called it confusing and performative. Financial records show reshoots cost an additional $40 million, with Disney desperately trying to fix what they now admitted was a perception crisis. Zegler, meanwhile, was trapped. Her contract forced her to promote a movie she no longer believed in. During press interviews, her frustration started to show. Clips of her calling the original Snow White weird or outdated went viral, and not in the way Disney wanted. The public backlash hit fast and hard. Social media lit up with angry fans accusing her of disrespecting a beloved classic. But what no one saw were the private calls, the closed-door meetings, the quiet breakdowns behind the PR smile. Zegler wasn't just defending a film, she was defending herself from a storm she never asked for. And as the hate poured in, she reached a boiling point. In internal discussions with Disney reps, she directly blamed Peter Dinklage. She argued that his criticism had forced the studio into a panic, causing them to gut the very heart of the story. She didn't deny the need for progress or sensitivity, but she made it clear that his approach had backfired. Dinklage had the influence, the credibility, and the platform. He dropped a match and walked away. She was left to stand in the flames. That fury built quietly, showing only in subtle ways. A colder tone during interviews, a sharp pause before answering anything about the film's changes. Internally, she questioned why Dinklage's concerns were prioritized over the creative work of hundreds of people, why one man's opinion had erased an entire group of characters and rewritten a story that was supposed to be hers. The dwarves weren't just characters, they were central to Snow White, and without them, the magic was gone. Even crew members started to admit the shift. In post-production meeting notes, one line stood out: "We've lost the fairy tale." What was meant to be a celebration of inclusion and imagination had turned into a case study in how quickly public pressure can derail a blockbuster. And for Rachel Zegler, that realization came with a bitter truth. She wasn't Snow White anymore. She was a placeholder in a PR nightmare. She had stepped into a legacy role. Instead, she walked out of a controversy with a fractured image and a film that may never recover. As the release date crept closer, Disney could feel the tension in the air. Marketing plans were slashed, press events were cut down, and promotional tie-ins that once promised millions in merchandise were either delayed or canceled altogether. Internally, the studio called it damage containment. Externally, it looked like fear. Rachel Zegler was still front and center, on posters, in trailers, on talk shows, but the energy was gone. The sparkle that usually surrounds a Disney princess had vanished, replaced by a cold, corporate silence. The final cut of the film revealed just how far it had drifted from its original path. Gone were the dwarves, gone was the prince. Even the iconic storyline, the poisoned apple, the true love's kiss, the woodland friendship, felt watered down. What remained was a hollow shell of a classic, weighed down by awkward dialogue and clumsy attempts at progressivism. Critics at early screenings were blunt. One called it a fairy tale that forgot how to tell a story. Another wrote, "Disney was so afraid of offense, they offended everyone." Meanwhile, the conversation around Peter Dinklage took on a life of its own. News outlets began revisiting his interview. Commentators started pointing out the ripple effects, how his critique sparked a series of decisions that led to one of Disney's biggest creative missteps in years. Dinklage had never followed up or clarified his comments, but he didn't need to. The studio's reaction did the talking for him. And while he moved on, unbothered, Rachel Zegler was still wading through the fallout. She was now getting heat from both sides. Some accused her of going along with the studio's changes too willingly. Others slammed her for distancing herself from the original story in interviews. She couldn't win. Her every word was dissected. Her silence was interpreted as guilt. Public perception was turning fast. Online, hashtags trended daily. Hash not my Snow White, hash Dinklage did this, hash Disney disaster. The fairy tale was now a firestorm. But Zegler wasn't done. Quietly, she began pushing back, not with press statements, but with her actions. She skipped smaller promo events. She stopped liking Disney posts on social media. On set of her next project, she reportedly asked to avoid all questions about Snow White. The once proud lead of the studio's new flagship film was doing everything she could to step away from the wreckage. The relationship between Zegler and Disney had soured, and everyone knew it. Disney executives, trying to regain some control, reached out to legacy actors and nostalgic influencers to help soften the blow. They hoped familiar faces might distract from the controversy. But the problem wasn't nostalgia, it was trust. Fans no longer believed in the brand that promised magic, and Zegler, who had once been the studio's symbol of fresh, bold direction, had become a cautionary tale of what happens when vision gets replaced by panic. The film was now less than a month from its theatrical debut. Early projections showed it could open well below expectations, with potential losses reaching over $100 million. Rachel Zegler, meanwhile, had gone quiet again, this time by choice. She'd played her part, fulfilled her contract, and carried a film that was never allowed to stand on its own. And now, she was letting it go, not with a dramatic farewell or a headline-making exit, just with silence. The fairy tale wasn't just rewritten, it had been erased. Box office numbers confirmed what everyone already knew. Snow White had bombed. The film pulled in a fraction of its projected earnings. By Sunday night, it was already being labeled a historic failure. Financial reports showed losses nearing $120 million, with international numbers offering no relief. Disney's top executives were already shifting blame behind the scenes. Meetings were held, heads rolled, fingers pointed in every direction. Bad marketing, poor timing, a changing audience. But one name kept surfacing, again and again. Peter Dinklage. The timeline was undeniable. Before his interview, the film had a clear plan, a full script, and 7 dwarves with fully developed arcs. After his comments, everything changed. Legal files show that the original production budget increased by over 30% post-rewrite. Internal communications confirm that the removal of the dwarves directly resulted from studio fear, not creative decision-making. The backlash didn't come from malice. It came from panic. Dinklage had lit the match, and Disney burned down its own film trying to avoid the flames. And through it all, Peter Dinklage remained silent. No statements, no clarifications, no follow-up. He had said what he said and left the fallout for others to sort through. Zegler, the star who never stood a chance, was left in the ruins. Once the centerpiece of Disney's bright new era, now a symbol of how quickly Hollywood can turn a fairy tale into a firestorm.